Welcome to the procurement process. This was originally presented as Procurement 301 at the Arts Conference in 2014. It has been updated to reflect recent USDA guidance. I'm Kathryn Hodges from the Department of Education, Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. The recorded webinar, Procurement Basics, covered defining procurement, touching on procurement regulations, talking about various procurement methods, defining small purchase thresholds, stressing good procurement principles and practices, stressing the importance of detailed specifications, and providing a list of prohibitive procurement practices. The recorded webinar, Procuring Locally, built on that information and covered ways to procure, contract requirements, documentation to maintain, writing clear specifications, defining local, incorporating geographic preference, evaluating bids, managing the contract, and forward contracts. This webinar will cover the procurement process, which includes planning and forecasting, writing specifications, defining local and applying geographic preference, advertising the solicitation, awarding the contract, managing the contract elements, and contract disputes. Any item or service purchased for any amount must follow the procurement regulations. All meal programs must follow proper procurement procedures. There are many steps in the procurement process and often does not end once the item is received or the service is performed. Thus, it is a process and not an event. Federal regulations require that every purchase made out of the nonprofit food service account be made using a procurement process, no matter how small the purchase is. The regulations do set out a different process for micro, small, and large purchases. Purchases under the small purchase threshold can follow the informal procurement method, which is simpler, but is still a procurement process that must be followed. Under the regulations, even the micro purchase threshold requires that a procurement process be conducted. Procurement regulations flow from federal to state to local. You should follow the strictest regulations that apply to you. If local or state regulations conflict with federal regulations, are less restrictive than federal, follow the federal regulations. Here are the 5 basic steps in the procurement process: planning, writing specifications, advertising the procurement, awarding a contract, and managing the contract. Before you buy anything, you must have a plan. Anything purchased that is not necessary will be considered an unallowable cost and cannot be paid for using the nonprofit school food service funds. Therefore, plan and forecast what you will need. Look at your pantry. What's on hand? What more do you need? Look at your menu. What will you need? When will you need it? Does your staff need a particular skill set to prepare the items purchased? Do they have that skill set? Will the purchase be made using the micro purchase opportunity, under $10,000, informally, between $10,000 but under your small purchase threshold, or formally, over your small purchase threshold? No matter the amount of the purchase, if you decide to purchase using the formal method, will you be using an invitation for bid or a request for proposal? Look at your production records. Did this item sell well the last time it was offered? Look at your budget. How much do you have to spend? Look at your kitchen. Do you need specialized equipment? Do you have the equipment but it needs repairs? Look at your enrollment. Will it change significantly during the upcoming year? Are there food trends in your area that you should be aware of? Writing clear and detailed specifications maximizes the chance of receiving the best possible product or service at the lowest possible price. You clearly state what you are looking to purchase, articulating your requirements. Everyone bids on the exact same thing, with everyone on a level playing field. For the informal process, write down exactly what you are purchasing and ask each vendor you call for the exact same thing. Don't ask one vendor for orange carrots to be delivered on Tuesdays from 10 to 11 and another vendor for multicolored carrots to be delivered whenever the vendor wants to deliver. For the formal process, you will still need to write down exactly what you are purchasing, but it will be in a more formal way. Either an invitation to bid or a request for proposal will be issued. Both the informal and the formal procurement methods require specifications. If you don't know what you want or when you want or need it, how can the vendors respond appropriately? Here are just a few areas where you can specify what you want: product name and variety, grade, size, quantity, quality, cleanliness, packaging, delivery, food safety, farm practices, and characteristics. The bolded sections are sections where you can easily add wording for geographic preferences. Remember, geographic preference is a preference only, not a specification. You can apply a geographic preference for unprocessed agricultural products like fresh apples, but you cannot for applesauce, as applesauce is considered processed. The product must retain its inherent characteristics to be considered unprocessed. If the item you are purchasing had any of these things done to it, you may add geographic preference wording to your solicitation: cooling, refrigeration, freezing, peeling, slicing, dicing, cutting, chopping, shucking, and grinding, making patties but with no additive, drying or dehydrating, washing, packaging, bagging, vacuum packing, adding preservation to prevent oxidation only, butchering livestock or poultry, pasteurizing. Who defines local? You do, just as long as your definition does not restrict fair and open competition. Your solicitation must be clear on how the different areas of the specifications will be evaluated. Be prepared to evaluate your bids, document, and keep the evaluation. A good way to start in defining what local means to you is to issue a request for information. That will help you find out what and who is out there to sell unprocessed agricultural products to you. As long as your definition does not restrict competition by limiting your term local to include only one or two potential vendors, then your definition can guide your procurement process. Also, you can define local in different ways for different products. For example, breaking up your apple purchases from your citrus purchases could make sense because there are many local vendors who can bid on apples, but only one or two produce wholesalers who would bid on both apples and citrus. In this case, you'd be increasing competition in your apple purchase and hopefully getting a lower price because of the increased competition. You can apply a geographic preference for the apples, while there are very few orange growers that would fall under the category of local. Your definition of local may be different for different items, but whatever it is, write it down, document it, and keep it on file. Decide on how much the geographic preference is worth to you. For example, is it worth paying 10% more for local apples? You'll disclose that in the solicitation and evaluate the bids accordingly. Advertising the procurement is the next step. How you advertise will be contingent on the approximate dollar amount of the anticipated purchase. Micro purchases up to $10,000, you can just go out and purchase. However, any future like purchases must be spread equitably around to other available and responsible vendors. Informal, from 10,000 to your applicable small purchase threshold, you can use a vendor list that is up to date. The best way to build a vendor list is to issue a request for information earlier in the year. Keep calling until you have at least 3 quotes, unless the item being purchased is not readily available from multiple vendors in your area of the state, or you just don't have multiple vendors available in your area of the state at all. Entities that make small purchases only, for example, childcare, family daycare, summer sites, or small schools that usually purchase from the local grocery store, should, at least once a season, take a field trip to multiple grocery chains with a standardized list of the 20 items you most often use and keep in inventory. Use this list to record the prices from the various stores and utilize the store that gives you the best consolidated price. Refer to SP 04-2018 Market Basket Analysis when procuring program goods and modify contracted for product lists for further guidance on this method of acquiring prices this way. Formal, or any purchase exceeding your applicable small purchase threshold, you may contact the vendors on your list, but you must also place the solicitation notice in the local paper, statewide paper, and/or on your website. Make sure you provide the vendors with enough time to respond. Your advertisement would clearly state the general nature of the goods and services to be procured, the method of procurement that will be used, how they can obtain the solicitation or more information, and the due date for responses to the solicitation. When determining due dates, keep in mind the complexity of the solicitation requirements and the time that's needed for pre-bid or award meetings, site visits, etc., and federal due dates. USDA recommends using a 4 to 6 week time period between the advertising of a solicitation and the due date of the bid or proposal. For summer food service programs, there should be at least 14 days between the advertising of the solicitation and the due date of the bid or proposal. In absence of applicable state or local laws, other solicitations should be publicly announced at least 21 days before the response is due, unless an emergency or good cause exists for expediting the acquisition. For formal solicitation, here are other examples of where to advertise: statewide newspapers, trade periodicals, designated internet sites, direct mailings for informal only, other print media that serves the business community and general public. Keep in mind that you may use an invitation for bid or request for proposal for any size purchase, but you always have to use them for purchases that will exceed your applicable small purchase threshold. At this point, you might be saying that you don't enter into contracts. You only issue purchase orders. Well, you should treat a purchase order with the same respect as a contract, and a purchase order should follow the same procurement practices as the issuance of a contract. The details on either document will basically be the same. The contract or the purchase order is the record of the deal, which, when signed, creates a legal document which lists the expectations by both sides. Therefore, both sides must seriously consider the effects of performance and potentially non-performance. The contract for the scope of the services and/or the type of goods must match the RFP or IFB. Essentially, what you ask for must be incorporated into the final document, whether contract or purchase order. Unfortunately, the one area that is often overlooked in the contract process is the managing of the contract. If you hold a contract for services, such as with a food service management company or an FSMC, you must constantly monitor the program. The example I often use is that you no longer make the peanut butter sandwich, but you are responsible in verifying that the peanut butter sandwich is made following USDA guidance and is paired with the appropriate components in the appropriate serving sizes in order to make a reimbursable meal that is correctly counted and claimed. And the student receiving that peanut butter sandwich is accurately charged based on their applicable meal benefit status. What you ordered and what you received must match with what you are being billed. If it is a management contract, then it is up to you to make sure the food service that has been outsourced to a company is compliant with all federal regulations. Basic contract elements is second nature when contracting for services. Most items would also be applicable when contracting for goods or issuing purchase orders. Your procurement documents identify the date of the contract or purchase order, or the duration if it is for a period of time. Who are the contract's parties? The scope of work, product specifications, the type of contract, is it cost reimbursable or fixed price, renewal options if available, steps to be taken if modification or change procedures are required, default or breach provisions, remedies, penalties, what happens if something goes wrong, termination rights. Other contract elements include record-keeping requirements, laws and regulations that govern the contract, requirements that all costs be the net of all discounts, rebates, and other applicable credits, clear methodology for tracking costs. These elements would have been identified in your solicitation. In addition, if these were required, then anyone that did not meet them would not have been awarded the contract or purchase order. Required compliance certifications and sanctions, any sanitation and licensing requirements, professional certification requirements or minimal levels of experience or education. One unfortunate side effect of contracts is that things don't always go perfectly. In those cases, disputes will have to be resolved. It is important to have effectively managed your contract to be able to better address disputes when they arise. For example, if the contract says something like deliveries can only be made prior to 10 in the morning, and you've accepted deliveries during the course of the contract after 10 without trying to remedy the situation with the vendor, then you may not use that reasoning to terminate the contract. The court or arbitrator will see that the late delivery had been acceptable in the past. They are looking at the conduct of the parties after the contract was awarded. The documentation retained through the management of the contract will support your side of the dispute if it comes to this. I cannot stress this point enough. At no point in the procurement process should a vendor guide the school food authority when preparing specifications, preparing an invitation for bid or request for proposal, or preparing the final contract document. Please feel free to contact the Office of Nutrition Programs and Services with any questions. Thank you for your time.